For more on this, we can speak with Ray Zucaro, Managing Principal with SW Asset Management, joining us again from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Good to see you, Ray. You know, there's so many questions here, and I want to get to the most pressing one is the GDP issue. There's a lot of talk that Russia's GDP might be coming down. There's a lot of talk about Ukraine's GDP, but let me get to Russia first. GDP out this week. A little bit of secrecy involved. What's going on here?
Thank you again, Phil, for having me on. Yes, Russia has delayed the release of the GDP, frankly, because it's probably not going to be very good. Although the GDP will be a little bit backward-looking before all this geopolitical issues with Ukraine took place. But it's obvious to many who follow Russia that the economy domestically has been slowing down. And what's going on currently now with Ukraine and Russia, you know, GDP for the second and third quarters is not going to look very good at all.
I mean, as an investor or someone who just kind of watches the market, my first reaction is, why does it matter? Because most likely a lot of, I'm sure critics out there would say that this is a short-term issue, and once the crisis passes, everything will be back to normal again. Is that one way to look at it?
Well, it depends on what happens with sanctions in the EU. The sanctions that the EU laid out today against the individuals and two entities in the one breakaway region, again, tell me that the European Union does not really want to do anything at this point. The sanctions, again, are basically meaningless and have no real power behind them. The EU, as you just said, is very reliant on Russia for energy, and they don't really want to poke the Russian bear at this point, given what's going on now.
We've heard this before, right? You have these sanctions. We talk about how great they are and how much impact they're going to have. And then we usually talk to an expert who says it's not going to have any impact at all because they're just not meaningful sanctions. And yet you see the Russian economy start to tank. So isn't it true that you can't have both? Either the sanctions work and the economy tanks in Russia, or it doesn't work and nothing happens to the economy. How do you explain that?
Unfortunately, Phil, you're thinking of that with a Western capitalist mindset. You know, what happens in the economy drives what's going to happen on the political side. Russians are look at the chess history that they have, the strategy that they have. You know, Russia as a nation is only 23 years old. The breakup of the Soviet Union is still a relatively recent war, or a recent event in the terms of the life of a nation. They have a much longer plan. If GDP is down 1% to 2% in the next year or two, do you think Mr. Putin is really concerned about that? He has a much bigger geopolitical ambition than worrying about domestic inflation, the ruble, or GDP growth. He wants to reform or partially position former nations of the Soviet Union as buffers and to try to rebuild somewhat of the empire that the nation used to be.
And what can Germany, what can France, what can any of the Western countries do if they don't like that plan? Is there, the sanctions, as you say, aren't really working? What's left?
Phil, that's a great question. Is Europe willing to go to the next step? The U.S. can do them unilaterally, but it's really up to Europe, because Europe's the one that buys the most of the energy, is a large trading partner. The problem is, again, with that Western commercial mentality, Russia's a very large strategic market for Europe. Cars, planes, infrastructure. It's a tough decision for a capitalistic-minded Western nation.
All right, let's shift gears and let's do the opposite. Let's go east. President Putin's heading over to China. They're going to have some very big meetings. Obviously, this will be a point of topic and discussion. What's going on here? What do you think the two countries might be talking about?
Again, strategy play here. Relations with the West are going through a strained period, obviously, because what's going on in Ukraine. You play the rising geopolitical power against them. More commerce with China. China is more concerned about long-term strategic relationships so they can get resources. Not as concerned about parts of Ukraine being split up and divided up to Russia or independent nations as a buffer between the EU and Russia. China wants long-term energy supplies, and Russia is in a wonderful position to provide that. You know what? Maybe China, from their bargaining point of view, seeing what's going on with the EU, will take this opportunity and sign a long-term, mutually beneficial agreement for both nations.
When you hear public opinion from the West, whether it's from the media or from leaders, and they go out and they say negative things and they bash Russia essentially for what they're trying to do here. Does that anger President Putin more? Does it make him more defiant to not do anything differently? Does that affect his strategy at all, you think?
I don't think at all. You look at his local popularities; it's at or all-time highs. He's playing the Russian bandwagon. You watch the local media; they're calling what's happening in Kiev. They're calling them fascists. They're calling, we have to protect our Russian ethnicity. And again, he's riding the wave of popularity unseen in many years.
All right, Ray Zucaro, thank you very much. Good to have you on the
Phil.
show again.